very much for these enlightening and really provocative talks about the challenges, the richness, the dynamism of independent publishing, and for all the dedicated work that you have all done, studying, producing, creating, supporting, distributing, and facing all of these challenges. And I love reading books, so I'm very excited to meet one of the founders. First I wanted to share a little zine that is created by our art librarian at Rutgers, and she has been doing a lot of work with zines, making zines with students, having exhibits of zines. She presented at Princeton just a few weeks ago in a big symposium about zines. So this is a zine about making zines. So it's a meta zine. And I decided you needed to each have one of these to take with you. And it's not like we haven't seen zines before, but I thought it was very fun that there's this zine about zines. And there have been really some wonderful exhibits in the art library that's right by here, and I've taken students to see them. And so, anyway, so that's a little
Classic fold.
Yes, yes. And she also has made a sheet that gives you a step-by-step how to fold and where to cut and how to fold it up. So I have one of those too. So I thought that would be fun for you to know that there's a bit of a zine culture happening on the Rutgers campus. And I also wanted to share a little magazine that some of you might know and love like I do, which is called One Story. How many people know One Story? I hope my English colleagues do. But anyway, One Story is, this is a magazine, and what you get when you subscribe to this magazine is one story. No advertising, no pictures. You get one story, once a month. And this is a small publishing group based in Brooklyn. They do get public funding from New York Council of the Arts and various, and some, NEH. They apply for things all the time. And so I picked them out a little bit randomly. And this is a little bit tiny because it's The Eclipse by Isaac Bashevis Singer, a new translation. So we just were enjoying that a week or so ago. Yes, that's a little gift for you. And there is a little online link, and you can hear or read an interview with the writer. So there is like a bit of a digital presence, but that's kind of, it's really this little book object that you get in the mail, and it's, I find it really a lot of fun. So I wanted you to have something like that as just to contribute to the distribution and circulation of these book objects. Fascinating discussion. I'm going to touch on a few points and maybe tell one or two stories. One thing that I found really, really interesting is how this boom, if we want to call it that, but this kind of emergence and in some ways a re-emergence of independent publishing, sort of in the 2000s. Some of that is directly a result of and a reaction to the multinational conglomerates that have pushed out the smaller writers, younger writers, the less commercially viable or assumed to be less commercially viable, they may or may not be, writers and projects. And so the result has been some very exciting, creative, dynamic, often young, voices and makers creating things. And so those two things we really can't separate. So I just wanted to say, that I think there's the market and the multinationals that, particularly for the Latin American market in the early 90s, that consolidation became a brick wall to get through. For anybody who wasn't publishing, self-help, popular psychology, or romance novels, or anything a little bit more literarily more challenging or experimental. So we definitely saw that, and that's. But from what I'm hearing, that's not just related to Latin America, but that's something I have studied a lot. Also, the parallel, if we want to think of it that way, resurgence of creative writing being such a popular field. And I remember the MLA every couple of years does these statistics, the Modern Language Association produces these statistics about enrollments in courses, and don't look at them, it's really depressing. Don't bother. But one of the few areas where there's been an increase is in English departments has been in creative writing. I don't know, Meredith and colleagues, you can tell me if that's still the case, but it's going strong here at Rutgers, and we have wonderful, writers teaching, and but it's that little graph that you see in the MLA newsletter. It's creative writing is sort of the thing that grows when everything else is sort of flat or worse. So that's kind of interesting to note here too. And so hearing about more, I knew of some of those creative writing programs, for example, in Colombia and other parts of Latin America, but I really wasn't aware of the dates. So that helped me see that there is some coinciding.
I wasn't aware of that until I started writing this, and I made a few phone calls, and everything matched, and I was like, yes.
Yeah, it's like a convergence there, so it's very, there have always been some, there's long-standing creative writing programs in the U.S. at the undergrad and the MFA level, of course, and even some for creative writing at the PhD level, very few, but there are a few. They've been there, but that there are many more, and much more competition to be accepted in them, because the demand is great. So I thought that was really an interesting phenomenon to consider here that came out sort of comparatively. I think that another thing I wanted to mention that came up sort of indirectly, but I think that a lot of the independent publishers, and you mentioned a little more specifically about the visual and the design, and that there were kind of creative hands involved in creating some of these presses and what they produce. And I think that there's a pleasure of the object that it really is shared in the independent publishing, networks and initiatives. Not that other books don't have a pleasure of the object also for the reader and for those who produce them, but I think there's more attention to unusual sizes, different kinds of materials, different kinds of colors, all kinds of creative things that happen in the books, inside the books as well as in the covers. So I just wanted to throw that out there. I wanted to mention also, I think that this leads into this, the paper book object, the concrete book object that is tactile and that we can give and circulate around and that we can collect, and yet the digital presence at the same time. I think that it's not a paradox, and that's another thing that we see a lot, is social media, websites, access to a certain number of books that you can download from certain presses or initiatives. There's many of them in Colombia that receive the kind of funding that you've talked about from IDARTES and from other venues. And so I think that's something I'd like to pursue more, particularly, John, you've done so much research on the sort of digital world there. So that's kind of a not very well formulated question, but just a way of thinking about that, maybe two sides of the same coin, or maybe it differs in different places, but how that sort of digital presence is not in many cases at odds with the book object for independent publishers. And I just wanted to tell one funny anecdote that has to do with Montevideo and one of my stays there a few years ago. There's a bookstore in Montevideo, Uruguay, called L'Autre and a sort of homage to the Count of L'Autre. And it's a small independent bookstore they have readings, they host sometimes bookmaking projects and things like that, and it's easily walkable from kind of in the downtown area. And I went there a lot and bought books there from time, while I was there. And not so many blocks away from that, I discovered a shop that sells absolutely fabulous sweaters, hand knitted, and the wool in Uruguay is quite famous. And so my husband and I started going there and ogling over sweaters and mittens and various things. And one day, it's kind of a brownstone, like a row house sort of house there. And the person we were chatting with who owns this shop named Mariana, who designs most of the sweaters and knits some of them herself, she needed to get something, or she was going to show us something, and she opened a door and there were books stacked. There were books stacked everywhere in the rest of the house. And so I started to ask a few questions. And she was the wife of the publisher and bookstore owner of L'Opiamont. It's a very small world there, really small. So somehow it felt like I knew that, and then we were playing with the children, so we ended up becoming friends with the whole family. But this problem of distribution that was mentioned very often, I mean, basically they just relied on the hallway underneath the stairs in the house of the person who started the press, because it was a bookstore and a press. So, anytime we went there, we would say, oh, well, what came in, what was printed, and we'd go take a peek and we'd see stacks and stacks and stacks. So real estate is key, I guess. So I thought that would round things out, and hopefully in there were a few sort of questions to pursue. Thanks so much. And thank you to our honored guests. We're so happy to have you here. And it's really been a wonderful day. And thank you to Dante also.
What